Can the death penalty be justified from a utilitarian perspective? By Autumn Sewell. Introduction. Few questions in criminal justice force us to confront our moral intuitions as sharply as the death penalty. Philosophers have long debated whether execution genuinely protects society or merely mirrors the violence it seeks to punish. Cesar Beccaria, a utilitarian philosopher, argues that capital punishment is unnecessary and less effective than lifelong imprisonment, maintaining that a just state must always choose the least severe punishment capable of deterring crime. However, from a utilitarian perspective, I disagree with Beccaria. The death penalty can be justified when it produces greater overall benefits for society than its alternative, lifelong imprisonment. Main argument. Beccaria, a foundational utilitarian thinker, offers several arguments for why the death penalty cannot be justified on utilitarian grounds. He begins by claiming that execution simply is not useful. For a punishment to be justified within utilitarianism, it must effectively deter crime, and Beccaria argues that the death penalty fails this test. In his view, life imprisonment is a far stronger deterrent because its suffering is prolonged and continually felt. As he writes, he who foresees that he must pass a great number of years, even his whole life, in pain and slavery, will be more powerfully restrained from committing crime. This suggests that a miserable, lifelong punishment exerts a greater deterrent force than a quick death, making life in prison the more effective and therefore a more justifiable option within a utilitarian framework. Beccaria's first point does not hold true in the modern criminal justice system. In practice, people sentenced to life often do not remain in prison for their entire lives. Many become eligible for parole after only 15 to 35 years. Genuine lifelong imprisonment typically requires multiple consecutive life sentences, which are far less common. Because a life sentence no longer reliably means life, its deterrent force has weakened. Offenders understand that a sentence labeled life imprisonment may still allow for eventual release, making the punishment serious but not the permanent, unavoidable consequence Beccaria envisioned. This gap between the name of the sentence and its actual severity introduces uncertainty, and uncertainty undermines deterrence. By contrast, the death penalty contains no ambiguity. Its finality and irreversibly make the cost of committing a capital crime unmistakably clear and overwhelming, producing a far stronger and more predictable deterrent for individuals who might otherwise gamble on the possibility of release. Beccaria also argues that the death penalty is an unjust form of punishment. He argues that punishment is only just when it's no more severe than what's necessary to deter people from committing the crime. Anything harsher exceeds the state's legitimate authority. Since he believes that lifelong imprisonment is already sufficient to deter offenders, Beccaria concludes that the death penalty is not only excessive, but completely unnecessary. I believe Beccaria's argument that the death penalty is excessive to be untrue from a utilitarian standpoint, a point that another philosopher named John Mill made against Beccaria is that life in prison is a far harsher punishment than the death penalty. I agree with Mill. The death penalty isn't as harsh or excessive as it may seem for multiple reasons. In rare cases where individuals serve a true life sentence, their years in prison often involve continuous psychological and physical suffering. The case of Jeffrey Dahmer illustrates this clearly. Sentenced to 15 life terms rather than execution, he became a target for other inmates because of the nature of his crimes. He was reportedly harassed and assaulted, and ultimately died when another inmate, Christopher Scarver, bludgeoned him to death. While Dahmer's crimes are horrific, most would agree that being violently murdered in prison is a far more brutal and drawn-out fate than a swift, controlled, and humane execution. This rings true for most criminals serving a life sentence. Objections and replies. Beccaria, or a critic, might object that the real problem is not with his theory, but with modern life sentencing practices. If life sentences today fail to deter crime, he would argue the solution is not to resort to execution, but to restore the true meaning of a lifelong imprisonment. Beccaria could claim that if we stopped shortening life sentences and eliminated the possibility of parole for the most serious offenders, then life imprisonment would once again function as the stronger deterrent. In his view, a complete, unavoidable life sentence still inflicts the prolonged suffering necessary to restrain potential criminals, making the death penalty unnecessary and therefore unjust. However, if we restored true, no parole life sentences, this would not necessarily strengthen deterrence in the way Beccaria assumes. Deterrence depends on how clearly and immediately a punishment is understood, and if a life sentence, no matter how strict, still carries uncertainty. Offenders may believe they can appeal, receive sentence reductions, or benefit from future policy changes. The death penalty, by contrast, removes all ambiguity. Its finality and inevitably create a far more definite and psychologically powerful deterrent. From a utilitarian perspective, focused on preventing future crime, and certainty and the clarity of execution make it more effective as a deterrent than even the strictest version of life imprisonment. In conclusion, the debate over the death penalty ultimately turns on which punishment best promotes overall social welfare. And on this point, Beccaria's argument no longer holds in the context of the modern criminal justice system. His claim that lifelong imprisonment deters more effectively depends on a sentencing system that no longer exists, one in which life truly meant life and carried a predictable, unavoidable burden of suffering. Today, the uncertainty surrounding parole, appeals, and sentence restrictions weakens the deterrent force that Beccaria believed made life imprisonment superior. By contrast, the death penalty's finality and clarity create a more powerful and reliable deterrent for the most serious crimes. When we evaluate punishment through a utilitarian lens, focusing on which policy most effectively prevents future harm, the death penalty can be justified as the option that provides greater security, greater predictability, and ultimately greater benefit to society. While Beccaria's concerns highlight important moral and political questions, they do not undermine the core utilitarian point. In a system where life sentences are inconsistent and often less effective, capital punishment can serve as the stronger tool for protecting the public and reducing future crime.